From yelling at the hardcores to nerfing Star-Lord, Marvel Snap players are passionate about a lot of things. But one thing they're more passionate about than anything else is yelling on the internet. This is Marvel Snap Hot Takes. Draft mode will be boring. The reality is you won't be able to build reliable synergies in your deck, and thus the mode will be an Arishem mirror borefest. I played a couple of draft modes created by the community before, and largely this is sort of what they felt like. There are a couple ways to approach doing a draft mode, but typically they either fall into one player gets some synergy stuff and the other player is totally unable to compete. An example would be someone getting towards like a Wong deck and your opponent is just playing, here are some good cards on curve, right? Or your opponent gets a Star-Lord really early and they can build around that. I think that as synergy has become more of a part of Marvel Snap, as tech cards have gotten worse, this take has gotten less correct, and it has actually gone to swing towards the other way, which is the thing you'll want to worry about, is that a metagame in a draft mode can't really regulate itself. It'll all be about just what exactly specific combo did I get that's ruining your life, and then what specific combo did you get that's ruining my life, and we don't really interact with each other. We just do our combos at each other. People don't like that about the latter. I think draft, where you don't even really have the option to be like, oh, I'll play a Cosmo and a Daredevil in order to beat the Star-Lord guy, you just kind of lose. I think that would be something that would definitely feel bad. Draft is also self-regulating, though, in that, those ridiculous synergies won't be there as much, but the more you win, the more you'll run into them because they'll be better, and presumably you'll be matched based on how many wins you have, I would have to guess. That's how every other draft mode that I've seen that isn't Magic the Gathering, like if you look at Runeterra draft mode or Hearthstone Arena, they typically do matchmaking like that. One thing that occurred to me recently that would be at least nominally interesting is draft mode as a function of Grand Arena, which sort of starts both players on like an equal player base, right? You get like a choice of your champion comes with the spell, and then maybe it works sort of like expeditions in Runeterra, right? Like you get like buckets of cards that are sort of defined by their relationship to the other buckets of cards and to your champion, and then you can just sort of build like that. That's the only draft mode thought that I've had that I actually like. Everything else I've kicked around about draft mode, like just drafting the cards, I don't think that's a satisfying experience. I've tried it. The sealed format where the pool of cards is split between two players and you each pick cards, sort of like a fantasy football snake draft, I've tried that. It seems way too in-depth for a shorter game mode. I think largely the only thing I can think of, because with Snap, the difficulty is you don't want the drafting process to take too long. You want it to be really quick because the games are really quick. That's one of the core appeals of Marvel Snap. The only thing I could think of that actually made sense to me was start at Grand Arena and work outwards in a sort of bucket-shaped system. That's kind of just it. I have literally no other good ideas for draft. I do think that if they just straight up do, here's some cards you can pick, it will be a flop. Games with bad monetization methods, especially pure gachas, foster better communities. I think largely that this diagnosis is based on the theory that expectations and the betrayal of those expectations are the cause of unrest in the community. And I think that that is both fair and not fair, because you can't really control people's expectations. You can try, but you can't actually do it. Where in a gacha game that is more open about being a gacha game, like a Honkai Star Rail or whatever, everyone kind of knows what the social contract is, whereas with Marvel Snap, it's trying to be, okay, well, we have this gacha monetization, but also if you just play the game, you can get a lot of stuff for free. There's a lot of things you can do as a free-to-play player here. Maybe you just want to buy the battle pass. It's not picking a lane in a meaningful way, and because it doesn't pick a lane, you get a lot of people that are like, well, I thought it was this, but it's actually this, right? And that sort of lack of expectation setting is really, really notable, I think. I think also that some of the expectations that were set when the game released were just unrealistic and bad in the first place. Like, we want everyone to have unique collections. Okay, everyone in the player base was like, that sucks and we hate it. And so it was like, okay, well, maybe we don't really want to do that anymore. But the expectation was kind of set. And it's like, how do you stick to this while not totally betraying the core principles? My largest overview of Marvel Snap would be that it got a lot of things right, but it's a two-pronged effort. They came into Marvel Snap thinking, one, we will revolutionize card games, and two, we will revolutionize card game monetization. And I think largely they succeeded on the first one. Marvel Snap is an incredible game that is uniquely well built and well put together. Whatever you want to say about recent card designs or anything like that, the core gameplay of this game is very good, very compelling, and fills a niche that frankly no other card game is able to do. I'm honestly a little bit shocked that there aren't more things that are copying Marvel Snap, because the second part of Marvel Snap's big bet, as it were, is that they were going to revolutionize how people collected card games. They were going to throw it back to the 90s playground days, and everyone would be different. And it turns out that just nobody likes that. People want to have options, and they will go out of their way to do that. And whether or not you look at that as a sort of fig leaf to cover up a very overwhelmingly, I would say, I think many people could characterize it as greedy monetization system that was Nexus events, right? Whether or not you think of that justification as being something they actually believed in or something that they used to cover up, hey, we want a lot of money, I think regardless, you could argue that no matter how you slice it, it was bad. It was a failure on either count. And so I think, to me, that's sort of the story of Marvel Snap. If you zoom out, that's the story, is that the monetization has always sort of been the thing that is the problem, and everything else is pretty much secondary to that. It's okay for a meta to warp around a card or deck. New cards and OTAs generally adjust things in a reasonable amount of time. I largely agree with this, but I do think that there is sort of a non-full collection perspective that should be considered here, which is it is a lot harder for someone to understand what deck is going to stick around, what deck is worth investing in, what deck. The fluidity of the metagame is great for people who are at the top of the metagame and are willing to put in the effort to stay at the top of the metagame and have all the cards in order to actually make those decisions, right? It's very good for enfranchised players. For less enfranchised players, it's sort of like trying to sail in a storm with a very small boat, and then you look to your left and you see someone in a galleon, and you're like, wait a minute, that's ridiculous. Why is it so much easier, right? And I think that, again, this is one of those things that comes back to the monetization of the game, right? This is a problem that cannot be divorced from that, where I think if you get rid of that, then yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong. You could totally trust that, they'll fix these problems. But the problem is the fixing of these problems is, I spent $10 on this and they made it worse. Mr. Fantastic was a famously hated card. The right decision for the metagame might not be the right decision for the people who actually spent money on this. The right decision for the metagame might not be the right decision for their bottom line. And to their credit, I think largely they have done a pretty good job. I would say a very good job of not making decisions that are we're gonna throw balance onto the bus to make money. They bite bullets when they need to, and frankly, they do things that I think are kind of the opposite of decisions that would make money some of the time, like nerfing a card before it shows up in a bundle. Seems like a company that was actively trying to use balance as a method of monetization would not do stuff like that. I think that people are correct to assess this stuff as a problem, though. And I think that Star-Lord specifically, I'm pretty comfortable dealing with him. I'm way more comfortable dealing with him than Sholau. I think that if I want to beat Star-Lord, I've got a million better ideas than Sholau, than if I have to beat Sholau, or Batroc even. But I think that what's really getting to people is that they feel like the storm is getting worse. The waves are getting choppier, right? And I think that's a pretty recent kind of feeling, right? People feel this way because it was Sholau and then Star-Lord, right? That's why they feel that way. They didn't feel this way during Weapon X season or whatever. That's real. One of the things that I find particularly interesting, though, is the idea that this is actually making people quit. Because I see a lot of people say stuff like this. I know someone who scrapes Infinite data, and there are more people in Infinite right now than there were at the same time last month. About a 10% increase when I looked at the numbers last, which was about 15 days into the season. And that, I don't really know how to square those two things. People are talking about it like this is a horrible problem. Everyone's quitting. Oh my God. And then you look at the numbers and it's like, well, that's actually not happening. And I don't want to just be like, well, I have to just ignore these people because they're telling me things that aren't true. Because I look at the number, I don't know. Like, I would love to be like, well, that's actually proof that Show Lao is the devil and everyone stopped playing in Show Lao season and Star-Lord is exciting. But I just sort of don't really know how to interpret that exactly, because I think that people are expressing a feeling that is a valid feeling for them to express and then sort of generalizing it to a larger segment of the player base than actually feels that feeling. Like, there's a lot of like, I see people talking about quitting. Oh my God, all my friends are quitting. And it's like, well, yeah, but is that a significant number compared to the amount of people who are excited to play this card? And how do you weigh things like that? I'm not smart enough to do that, but I will say I was pretty taken aback when I saw the numbers for the Infinite stuff and compared it to the way people talk about this game. It's like, oh, wait, these are just not the same reality. Why in the world do we not have activate, end of turn, start of turn filters in the browse menu? Also, let me filter cards by uncommon to infinite instead of sorting by them. Once you play for a while, you have to scroll for an eternity to find legendary or ultra variants. Absolutely, unequivocally, 100% correct. So correct that I don't even know if I can justify putting this in a hot takes video. Like, this is just the coldest take of all time. It's so obviously true and correct that this stuff should exist. It is like, there's no controversy here. I don't think there's a single person watching this who's like, this is incorrect. Obviously correct. This take is doing North Korea election numbers. This take is 99 to 1%. This take is the least controversial thing of all time. It is so clearly and obviously the right take to have. Yes, all of these things should exist. Absolutely no question about it. X23 should be reverted to 1-2. I'll go one further. I think X23 should be buffed to 1-3. The nerf to X23 happened just after, I believe, Headpool's release, when Destroy was doing some pretty reasonable stuff. But a lot of that, and you know me, I think, presumably, if you're watching this video, one of the common takes that I have is the game is in a good spot when Destroy is one of the best decks. It's a fundamentally synergy-based, interesting, fair deck that can do a lot of output, but is balanced out by a relative lack of access to that output. X23 felt like a nerf where it's like, all right, we'd like to make this a little bit worse, but we don't want to address the cool parts of the deck, right? But to me, I think that is a little temporal, right? There is basically no argument that a 1-2 X23 would do anything to make Destroy better in the metagame that we have right now, would do anything to make Destroy better in any conceivable way in the near future, and would even meaningfully impact the way in which Destroy is functioning. The reason for this is largely related to the fallout from the Techpocalypse and all of those things. Now, as you may know, my take on the Techpocalypse has largely been, I thought it would be terrible, and it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought. And now we are finally getting to the point where it's like, oh, wait, no, this is bad. It is. We are finally like getting to the point that I was afraid would happen immediately, but didn't. And it was like, okay, I think that it might be time to rein this stuff back in. And I bring this up in the context of Destroy because Destroy is fundamentally like a combo deck, right? That is fundamentally what it's trying to do. And as a combo deck, it is a combo deck that is a lot more dependent on its opening hand than many other combo decks are. I think a good example would be to compare Destroy to Show Lao. You want to access all of your power with Destroy, you better get that opening hand Deadpool and maybe an opening hand Agony to go with it. You want to access all your power with Show Lao, draw him by turn 6. Like, it's a very different game. And a lot of these newer cards that work in these synergistic ways are just a lot more forgiving than Destroy is. And Destroy makes up for that by having, like, fairly competent backup plans, right? If you don't have the Deadpool, you have Headpool and X23, and you can still play a game with, like, Death and Null sometimes and do things. Or even put a Show Lao in your Destroy deck and just get some points out that way. That's actually the part of Destroy that I like, first of all. But second of all, that's always sort of been the trade-off here, right? It's a deck that has like a mediocre mid-range game plan and a good combo game plan that is very unreliable. In a combo world, the mediocre mid-range game plan doesn't matter. It's never winning a game against anyone comboing you up. It just is not doing that. Not happening. And so what Destroy becomes is a deck that is just the combo. And it's worse at being a combo deck than a real combo deck is. And that's the problem. Why the hell hasn't Nocturne been returned back to 3-5? I'll tell you why. Because I think that would genuinely be a bad idea. One of the things about locations in Marvel Snap is that they are a way of making sure that worse players can beat better players with X amount of regularity. Sometimes you will get a location that asymmetrically favors you and asymmetrically disfavors your opponent. The more free roll a card like Nocturne is, and I think a great example of this is Merlin, who had this problem. The more free roll a card like that is, the less a worse player will beat a good player thanks to that card. People act like it's downside that Nocturne can randomly screw you over. And I think that's just sort of fundamentally ridiculous. Is it worse than if it turned the location into ruins? Yeah, but you're not moving the Nocturne unless what you're getting rid of is better, or is better for you than basically anything else that could show up. Or worse for you than basically anything else that could show up. Sorry. And so I think it is a really bad idea on like a fundamental game design level for good location cards to be at or above the vanilla curve. Merlin is a great example of this. He is a stronger card, but he is a worse location control card. Nocturne always will get you what you want. There will be a location change. I have had many games with Merlin where I keep getting the other two spells. It is entirely possible that that happens. I have had many games with Merlin where I run into hand size issues and I can't get something out of him. This is not to say that he's not a better card than Nocturne, but I think a lot of people look at it and say, Merlin was okay, why wouldn't Nocturne be okay? Because Nocturne is a much more simple and easy solution. You just put her in the deck. And I think people are like, oh, it wouldn't even be that good. Yes, it would. If you let me play 3-5 Nocturne, it's going in my Super Giant deck right now, immediately. It would be that good. I would absolutely play that card. It's going in Batroc immediately. It would be that good. I would play that card. Like, I don't know what people are talking about. And so you have this card where it's like, I think if you wanted to 3-5 her, you could probably justify it on balance. I think you could be like, balance-wise, this is an acceptable decision. I just don't think you could justify it on the combination of balance and her specific interaction with locations. She simply makes the game have less variance in it. You don't want that. You just don't. Marvel Snap has a good balance of variance and skill. And right now, the more you tilt that in favor of the player who is playing like, oh, it's my mid-range deck where I'm distributing all my power on the final turn of the game, because that's the other half of Nocturne, right? She's a 3-5 that moves. Another skill testing card. It's just one of those things that in the hands of good players makes the game more imbalanced against worse players. And I just think that's a bad idea. I honestly sort of think that they've made too many locations that don't do enough to the metagame. Like, there's just kind of a lot of like middling things that happen in a Marvel Snap game where like people talk about the Techpocalypse and these sort of like linear combo decks being a problem because of that. Just gut check. It sort of feels to me like another thing that's a problem is locations just aren't meaningfully disruptive to those decks anymore. They're just not as meaningfully disruptive as they otherwise would have been. And I think that that is like a real thing. And it's the kind of thing I have to do some research on, but just a vibe check there that feels like a real thing to me. And I wonder about the idea of like making locations even less of a factor in Marvel Snap. I think they're an important part, and the way in which they balance the game is relevant, and the way in which they add texture to the game is important. And I think that making cards that get rid of them in your favor asymmetrically and then giving those cards 3-5 movable bodies is bad. People don't know how good they have it with Snap. Acquisition might be hard, notifications bugged, the game crashes when you use an activate, but I really can't think of another game that's as good as Snap and doesn't have problems. I've quit so many digital TCGs, but I'm still here. I think this is actually like, if you want like a real reason that people get really mad at Marvel Snap, it's because the game is really good. Like, every so often I'll see a comment and ask the team that is just one of the rudest things I've ever seen. And at the end of it, they'll be like, I'm really only asking because I love the game. And for the longest time, I would look at those comments and I would be like, isn't that just a fig leaf? So you can be like, please ignore the part where I asked if you guys had anyone testing this card at all and implied you were totally incompetent at your job. I just love your game so much that I had to do that, you know? Like, it sort of felt a little like, okay, you don't mean that, right? But I kind of wonder, you know, maybe people do, right? And maybe the thing about Marvel Snap is that it's such a good game that any impediment to you doing what you want to do in Marvel Snap, because doing what you want to do in Marvel Snap is so damn fun and so damn rewarding and so damn interesting, is just like a horrible thing in your mind, right? Like, maybe what's actually going on, like, I don't know. I think a lot of the time people use, oh, I just love the game so much as an excuse for toxicity. My passion comes from how much I love the game, which is why I'm accusing you of being a moron, right? And I think that is still a thing people do, but I also think that just caring enough to do that does mean that you kind of love the game. Like, just does kind of mean that, right? And I think that is a really interesting dynamic, because it shows how creating something people love gives them a feeling of ownership, not just over it, but over you, the person who did it. It's really interesting to see that dynamic at play. I see a lot of people who really love the game, and what they're mad at is, you know, I'm losing, there's a new card that's making me lose, and then that gets manifested as like, did you guys have anyone test this? Are you guys actually kidding me with this? You're ruining my experience, right? I'm trying really hard to look at everyone as a human, you know? And it's definitely a perspective that I think makes sense, even if I think it's misguided. It is an expression of love for the game. They love the game. And what they're mad at is the part where someone beats them, or the part where it doesn't feel fair, or the part where they have to spend money to get the new card, or any of that stuff, right? And they're mad at something being in the way of their desired experience. But the fact that they want that experience so much is indicative that, yeah, Marvel Snap is a great game. It is. Sorry. And with that, the hottest take of all, thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.